We've now looked at three possible solutions to the reverse string function. Now, as you were working on your own solution here, you might have noticed that it was kind of hard to debug your work. In other words, the function that you put together, you might have noticed that it's kind of tough to figure out whether or not you're doing the right thing until all the tests are passing over here. And these tests aren't the most effective thing for helping you arrive at the solution or develop a solution. They're really more about making sure you did the right thing. So in this section, I want to give you a quick little tool that you can use to very easily debug your work. And this tool that I'm going to show you can be used not only on this reverse string function, you can use it anywhere inside the course. So the tool that we're going to use is a regular debugger statement. If you've never used debuggers before, that's totally fine. We'll take a look at exactly how they're put together. So let's imagine for a second that maybe we want to pause execution of our code inside this function so that we can inspect some variable inside of here. To do so, we can place a debugger statement like so. So now, anytime the JavaScript interpreter executes this line of code, it will pause in execution, and we can take that opportunity to inspect some of the different variables that are floating around our program. This makes it extremely useful for debugging or essentially developing our solution. To make sure that we can actually catch this debugger right here, whenever we place a debugger statement like this, we do have to manually call the function. So right now, we are defining the function and then immediately exporting it. If you want to use a debugger, make sure that you call the function. So I'll call it right afterwards, right after we define it, I'll call it with a string of ASDF. So now if we run this function in debugger mode, or if we run this file, we will pause an execution right here, and then we can inspect a couple different variables and just kind of see what's going on. So let's figure out exactly how that works. I'm going to flip on over to my terminal. I'm going to kill my test by pressing Control-C. I'm then going to change into my reverse string directory, reverse string, and then I'm going to execute that file, that function that we were just working on in debugger mode. And I can do that by writing node inspect index.js, like so. Now when I do so, you're going to see some information pop up. It says that we have a debugger listening, and it's attached to our running process. You'll then see some little snippet of code right here, and then we get kind of a prompt right here asking us what we want to do. So we just launched that file in debugger mode. The instant it started up inside of our console right here, it paused an execution on the very first line of our file. So right now nothing is running. It's just saying, hey, I'm ready to start to inspect your code. To tell this inspector to continue executing our code, we can write cont, short for continue, or you can write just simply C and then hit enter. So now the debugger started to, or I should say the interpreter, executed our file line by line until it found a debugger statement. Once it got to this debugger statement, it paused an execution. And it's now saying, hey, if you want to, you can inspect some of the variables that are floating around inside this function. Now, let's imagine that we wanted to look at the argument right here of str, or string. You cannot just put in str right here. To actually inspect a variable, we have to enter a REPL mode. REPL being short for read, edit, something, whatever it is. So we'll run the command REPL. That'll kick us into an actual JavaScript console right here where we can start to inspect variables that exist inside of our code base. So I could look at the variable string, and it returns to me, okay, here's the value of that variable is. And then if I wanted to, I could always start to say, copy over some code, like I'll copy this expression right here. I can paste it right here, and I see, okay, yeah, looks like that did in fact reverse the string properly. So you can use this entire REPL and debugger thing to very easily audit your code base and just kind of develop it on the fly and get a sense of exactly how the data inside of your function is working. So this is a tool that I highly recommend you give a shot with on some future solutions. Definitely give this a shot. Obviously, you can't always do this in an interview setting, but as you're practicing these problems, this is extremely useful to use. Just to give you a slightly better example of why this would be useful, let's look at a slightly different implementation of this. So by the way, to exit the REPL, I can, I can hit Control-C. That kicks me back to debug mode. and then to continue execution of my file, I can hit C and enter again. And in this case, there was no other debugger statement inside my code base, so it just quit. And I can hit Control C again to completely exit the debugger. So let's look at a better example of this. I'm going to remove the debugger statement we had placed. I'm going to take this last implementation of reverse that we had put together. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to move it to the bottom of the file and comment it out. And then I want to take that earlier solution we had put together with a for loop. So I'm going to uncomment this thing. I'm going to cut it, and then I'll paste it above the reverse function call, like so. And then let's say that maybe something appears to be going wrong inside of our for loop right here. So maybe after we start to concatenate the string together, let's put a debugger statement right here. And this will allow us to inspect all the different variables inside the for loop and figure out exactly what's going on there. So again, I can go over to my terminal. I'll write node inspect index.js. Again, I get kicked into debug mode. We are paused in execution on the first line of the file. I'll run C to continue execution of our code until we get to the debugger statement. So here's the debugger statement, and now I can enter the REPL and start to inspect some of the variables at this point in time. So possible variables that I might want to look at would be maybe character, string, or reversed, anything in here. So we could look at reversed. Okay, there's what reversed is. We could look at character. There's what character is, and string, like so. Now, notice how this is a for loop. So the body of the for loop will be executed many times in a row. So if I want to, I could press Control C to leave the REPL. I can continue execution again, and now I just got paused again at the second iteration through the for loop. And if I hit C again, there's the third time, and then the fourth time. So I can enter REPL again. I can look at the reverse string, and now it's the entire reversed string. And of course I can look at character as well, and now it's the last character that we were iterating over, which in this case is F. So do be aware that if you place a debugger statement somewhere inside of a for loop or a for each or a map statement or whatever, it will be called multiple times, and you'll have to use that C command to skip through it multiple times. Okay, so I think that you've got a reasonable idea of the debugger here. Again, you can use it throughout the course on any problem we are working on to get a better idea of how your code is working. I'll show you a diagram in just a second to remind you of some of the steps you need to go through to set up the debugger. Just keep in mind that when you are all done with the debugger, you will want to remove the debugger statement and then also remove the manual function call down here. We have to add that manual function call, the one that we just had a second ago, because if we don't call the function manually, then when we start to inspect this file, there's nothing that actually invokes the reverse function inside of here. So if we ran the debugger on this file as is, nothing actually invokes the reverse function. So even if we had a debugger inside of here, it would never get caught because we're never executing the function. So that's why we added in the manual function call right here. Okay, so like I said, one last thing I want to show you is the diagram of the steps to use to get the debugger to show up. If you want to, you could take a screenshot of this right here. Also remember that all the diagrams from this course are available inside of the GitHub repository. So you could always go and take a screenshot or just manually download this diagram just to have the steps of how to do this thing up for yourself. All right, so I'm glad that we now have some method to effectively debug our code. We will use this method inside these videos several times throughout the rest of the course, but again, feel free to use this debugger method as you are developing solutions throughout any problem. You can use this on any problem you look at, and I really encourage you to do so because it'll give you a much better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. All right, so I think that's enough of that. Let's take a break and continue with our next problem in the next section.